Hawksbee and Jacobs here on talkSPORT. We've been joined in the studio by Calum Nicolas. His new book is called Life in the Pitlane, My Journey to the Heart of F1, from humble beginnings as a mechanic. He's got into the glamorous world of F1. He is a senior power unit assembly technician for Red Bull Racing. How you doing, Calum? Good to see you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
There could be people listening in their workshop now, doing some work on someone's Fiesta, dreaming that one day they could do this gig. And that's kind of how you started, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you've had a look through the book, you'll see that that's very much where I started. So, yeah, it's absolutely possible.
What's the leap then? Just tell us the sort of progress you made from those sort of humble beginnings. You went off to school, didn't you, to train specifically in this area?
Yeah, I did. I went back to the National College for Motorsport, which is at Silverstone Circuit. From there on, I sort of sought to get an apprenticeship, and then I worked my way up sort of what we refer to as sort of the ladder in motorsport. You know, the similar way that a driver works his way up through junior formulas to get to F1. It's very similar for mechanics. You know, and you'll work in lots of different series and build that sort of CV and the references that go with it until eventually you find an F1 job that's sort of right up your street and you go for it, and hopefully you can sort of keep progressing from there.
How competitive is it to land those jobs, or do they tend to come to you? You get a bit of a reputation and the teams kind of come looking for you?
It can be both ways. You can absolutely sort of succeed as sort of what you'd consider an outsider, someone who's not already in the paddock, but very much it is still a sport where your network and things like that can be really powerful. For me, my first role in F1 was one where I know my reputation had led someone to come looking for me for a job that they had going. Very much the other way before I joined Red Bull Racing. It was me out there hunting for a job to stay in the sport. As the last team went into administration, I was sort of scrambling to try and stay in the sport that I loved. So it can go both ways, but yeah, these opportunities are out there.
It seems very glamorous on the face of it, but it's a lot of travelling. I mean, does that get a bit wearing?
It is. I always say that, you know, when I started my first year in the paddock, I was 22, 23 years old, so it was wonderful. You know, travel around the world, the nomadic lifestyle, very few responsibilities in life, and yeah, for sure, as you get older, things do get harder. It does get more difficult to sort of find that work-life balance. Ultimately, I think most of the people working in the sport will tell you that they sort of endure it because of the love for the racing.
We see the kind of pit teams, and we see them, this sort of amalgamous group of people who kind of just do everything in the pits. But I take it you're all specialists, aren't you, really?
Yeah, so it's a different one. So pit stops for us in the F1 paddock is sort of our secondary job. You know, everybody in the pit crew, we have a primary role. Like obviously for myself, it's PU assembly. For a lot of the other, obviously electricians, engineers, IT technicians, all of these other roles, as well as the mechanics. So pit stops are sort of our secondary job. Ultimately, everybody's trained in their sort of original discipline, and it's something that we all come together to make it work in the pit lane.
Yeah.
Have you ever broken down on the motorway or had to change a tyre?
Do you know what? I've got an Audi that has a spate of broken wheels constantly, like cracking wheels and potholes. So I actually spend a lot of time dealing with wheels and tyres on my own car, and it's much easier on an F1 car, I can tell you that.
It is incredibly pressurised, though, Calum. I would have think, you know, obviously you can't come up with it. The drivers in the moment looking to win a race, split-second decisions being made, and the team want to win, obviously, as constructors. And you just, you know, you can't make mistakes. They want answers, and they want them like in milliseconds, don't they?
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's a real, between sort of drivers and engineers and us in the garage, it's a real relationship built on trust. You know, we're in a fortunate position with our drivers. We know that, you know, with Max, if we deliver him the car that he needs, he will deliver the results, and that's very much what it is. But it's like the pressure's there, but it's an internalised pressure. You know, more than anything, it's from ourselves. We're our own biggest critics, and that's how it goes.
It's a very technical sport, and there's a lot of chat about the regulations and
changing next year.
They're changing it, but there's a slightly different situation this year, isn't it? They're not changing. You've got last year's regulations for another year.
Yeah,
presumably that's going to make a difference.
I think I think it's got the potential to be a really exciting season. Obviously, the last time we saw a season that was like really down to the wire was back in 2021. That sort of came about partly as a result of really stable regulations. So I think there's a potential for that to be the case this year. I think there is the worry that if one team does get it particularly right, there is the sort of chance that the other teams might say, well, with the regulations changing for 2026, we might not put the resources in to chase them. But I think we'll have to just see. You know, we go to Bahrain pre-season testing at the end of this month, and we'll start to get an idea of where everyone is. But look, I think we could be in for a really exciting Formula One season.
Because the drivers still want to will want to compete. Whatever's going on with the
For
cars
sure.
and the constructors, they've got that in.
Yeah,
them,
there's no switching it off. If they've got the car, they're going to go for all of it.
There's been some attempts, sorry, Paul, to sanitise the sport and take out the sort of swearing that drivers might do in the heat of the moment, which I think is a shame, actually, because people like all that stuff. I wouldn't imagine you're bothered if Max has a go at you. You'll probably think, well, he's either right or I'll tell him later he's wrong.
I mean, the other thing is, I think, like, when we hear drivers on the radio, you know, in the midst of a race, in the midst of a battle, and their language can be colourful. I think the important thing to remember is they really are operating in that window where they're under a great deal of pressure.
Sure.
We never sit in the garage and hear those comments and think to ourselves, "Oh God, I can't believe he's being mean to us." That's not really the nature of the people that work in the sport.
No time to sulk, is there?
No, exactly.
I don't imagine your language in the paddock is pretty industrial as well, isn't it?
It can be at times, you know. Like you said, it's a high stress environment, but also, you know, you can use, like, when I look at language, I always think of it as, you know, you can use it and it not be, you know, it's not an offensive thing.
Yeah.
You know, like I said the other day, you know, sometimes when people are using colourful language in the garage, there's smiles while they're doing it. It's not, you know, it doesn't necessarily tell you the mood. It's just a word. It's something that I tell my daughter quite often, you know, like I have a 6-year-old daughter, and I say to her, look, you know, there's language that's appropriate in some situations and not in others. And I think a lot of times people say, oh, well, these stars, they have a responsibility as role models. And I sort of say, well, for me, actually, as a parent, I think that responsibility is mine.
I agree
to teach my kids what's for, you know, what's appropriate in some environment and what's not appropriate in other environments. I think that as a parent, you should take that responsibility on yourself rather than expect everybody else to be your role model.
What do you look back on as the best and worst moments in your time in F1?
Well, I mean, I've been really fortunate. Last 10 years, you know, I've had a lot of great moments.
Yeah.
You know, we won championships. Certainly 2023, the whole season was unbelievable. That's something that will always stick in my mind. I think for me, in terms of my worst moments, will always be, unfortunately, will be the accident that Jules Bianchi had in 2014 at Suzuka. So that's probably my lowest time since I've been in the sport. It was a really hard thing to sort of absorb and take forward and sort of move on from. But yeah, look, like I said, last 10 years, I've had some great experiences. It really has been sort of a blessing.
Moments like that when we see terrible accidents, tragic accidents, it makes us realise, because there is this feeling that the cars are incredibly safe and the drivers are incredibly... It is safer than it used to be, but you're never going to completely eliminate that, are you?
No, absolutely not. And I think, you know, we, like you say, we're in a bit of a luxurious position now that for the most part we see huge accidents, but the cars are so safe and the circuits have been made so safe. And it's sort of, for us in the garage, you know, you're involved in an accident and you're like frustrated, you're annoyed because your race has been ruined. And really, that's a position of privilege.
Yeah.
You know, like, I know, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, when you were a mechanic in the garage and your car was in a big accident, you had a genuine fear for the person driving it. Thankfully, we're in a position where we don't, that's not our primary necessarily. That's not going to be the thing that we assume is going to happen straight away. We're sort of so used to those cars being safe now.
Should quickly ask you about Lewis at Ferrari. I mean, that's something people are looking forward to. How do you think that might go?
Mate, I think it's really exciting. I think if you're going to get the best out of Lewis, it's going to be when he's fired up. Like a new opportunity like this at Ferrari, obviously, I think we're all aware it clearly means a great deal to him. Ferrari, with their history and their passion, it's something that a lot of drivers want to have as a part of their career. So I mean, I think it'd be really exciting. I think him and Charles Leclerc will work really well together. I think from the limited interaction I have with Charles, he seemed like the kind of guy that's always gonna want to learn from someone with sort of the experience of Lewis, and I think Lewis will take great pleasure in sort of helping the team back to glory.
Yeah, I mean, we should point out you're a Manchester United fan. You were telling our team. Is there much football chat amongst you all, amongst the drivers and the mechanics?
It's probably better to not talk about it. You know? It's been difficult for me. Our trackside chief engineer Paul Monaghan, he's a diehard Liverpool fan.
Oh.
So he's obviously had the better of me for a fair while now. Do you know what, football chat, it doesn't happen that often, but it does get fierce.
Yeah. I'm sure it does. Yeah. So just a bit of advice for anybody, as we said, if there is someone out there saying, I'd love to get involved in this area, you know, in the same sort of line of work that you are, but would like to move into Formula One. I know there's no magic bullet, but if you had some advice, Callum, what would you say to them?
I tend to say to people that if you want to start a career in racing, the best way you can sort of begin is to find some near you. You know, there's tracks all over the UK. There's so many motorsport events around in the UK. And I often say to people, like, the way I got my first opportunity was by walking a paddock while teams were setting up and simply asking every single team in the paddock if I could come along for the weekend and get a bit of experience and a reference for my CV. And as I said in my book, I slept in my car that weekend during the Brit Car 24-hour. And that was sort of a big boost to me. It was a piece of advice that I was given very early.
And who was it who said yes to you? Who was the one that came through?
It was a small team called Aurelian Motorsport. They were a small father and son team running a little Honda Integra. And they were really happy to just have me come along. They fed and watered me for the weekend, and really that was the first reference that I could put on a CV when I went out looking for proper jobs in motorsport. So that's the first bit of advice I can get, is find out what motorsport is near you and see if there's a way that you can volunteer to go and get involved.
Excellent. Well, we wish you well with the book, Calum. Have a good season. Enjoy.
Thank you very much.
The book's called Life in the Pitlane, My Journey to the Heart of F1 by Calum Nicolas. It's out on the 27th of February. And it's published by Little Brown out in hardback. Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you, guys.
Paul Hawksbee and Andy Jacobs here on talkSPORT. No Football Manager 25, I'm afraid. I don't know if do you ever play that kind? Do you play a bit of Football Manager?
It's been a long time since I've played Football Manager.
Wow.
I probably was still in my late teens by the time I was doing it.
Well, they'll have new regulations next year as well. They'll be back next year.